A couple of nights ago, I went to see this very, very fascinating lecture by this very, very intelligent woman. Now, right off the bat, when I walked into the room, it seemed like this was going to be some kind of weird, non-mainstream type lecture. Like the kind of place you would expect to see somebody talk about UFOs or something, or some type of psychic phenomenon where they're not connected to any kind of mainstream organization. But she started off her PowerPoint presentation by showing all of her qualifications, all of her recommendations, all of her accomplishments. And she's got all kinds of PhDs. She's attached to a couple of major universities. She's a consultant with a few Fortune 500 companies that have their own rules to follow. And she said the reason that she was giving this lecture in this non-mainstream kind of sketchy seeming location was she wanted to share information that she wasn't allowed to otherwise share. And at first, I thought this was some kind of a wind-up to get us to buy some seminar, to buy some persuasion products. But she didn't sell anything. At the end of her lecture, she didn't have anything like, contact me if you want to learn more, or buy my book. It wasn't like that. She was just sharing information, and she was there for like a couple of hours after her presentation ended to just answer questions. And the main thrust of this presentation, the main idea of her talk was non-mainstream persuasion techniques that are extremely powerful. And she said that most persuasion techniques today, and for the past 10 or 20 years, have all been filtered through some kind of, not necessarily an industrial complex, but they've been filtered through some kind of mainstream structure that removes all the persuasive energy or the persuasive techniques. For example, all of modern marketing is mass marketing. You take very, very basic ideas and you just spam them out all over the population, and you get maybe 2% sales success. And because most companies today, and she talked about this for a little bit and it's still kind of confusing to me, but she said that most companies today, because they have so much debt, because the nature of our economy, because there's so much fake money being created by the Federal Reserve or by the Treasury Department or whoever creates money, there's so much expansion of the money supply. So many companies today are essentially living off their credit cards. So when they spam out these mass marketing messages and they get a 2% success rate, this is probably not even close to ROI, or a positive ROI. But because they have access to so much credit, they can just keep borrowing money and spamming out these marketing messages, which doesn't mean they ever have to fine-tune their marketing messages to make a profit, which means any persuasive energy, any persuasive technology, any persuasive psychology in their marketing message gets lost within this massive debt-driven system. And she said most persuasive techniques are like this. Even huge sales companies that train their salespeople, they hire some type of company, they hire some boilerplate sales techniques, they teach this boilerplate sales technique to everybody in their company, and whether or not they make a profit, whether or not they earn positive ROI, isn't really the issue so long as they have access to more credit, to more debt. They're not necessarily constrained like companies were a long time ago, where if you spend $1 million on the back end, you have to make more than $1 million on the front end, which forces you to stay on top of your persuasion game, your sales game, your marketing game. But today, if you spend $1 million on the back end and you only make $500,000 on the front end, you could just borrow another $1 million from extra low interest rates and not really ever worry if your persuasion model is very effective. She said this is why she's so frustrated, because all the people she consults with, all the universities that she teaches at, they're not really concerned with what actually works from a persuasion standpoint. They're only concerned with what kind of sounds like it works enough so they can keep borrowing money and keep this kind of fake business model running. But she said that before she became a consultant, she was in private practice, and she did some experimentation on these very, very effective persuasion techniques that are extremely powerful. But she's very frustrated because nobody's really interested in learning these anymore because they can just keep borrowing money and there's really no need to persuade anybody. But on a one-to-one personal level, on a one-to-one interpersonal level, you can become massively persuasive. You can persuade people to do almost anything you want. You can seduce people to fall in love with you. But this requires you have a characteristic that not very many people have today. And she was saying this characteristic that maybe you have, but most people don't have, is the ability to turn off your ego. Because if you can turn off your ego, you can expand the desire map and you can expand the ego map of other people. Because inside everybody's head are two things, two powerful things. And she said, when you understand these two things, when you leverage these two things, you can get anybody to do anything, literally. But most people will never be able to do this because most people are trapped inside their own ego. But in order to leverage these two elements that exist in other people's heads, you have to be able to turn off your own ego, which most people can't do. In order to be able to use this technique, you have to be able to kind of sit back and watch people talk. You have to be able to sit back and avoid the temptation of asserting yourself into a conversation. You have to be able to sit back and just introspectively understand what other people are talking about without feeling the need to inject yourself into the conversation. And she said it works like this. Everybody has an unlimited amount of desires in their head. Everybody you see out in the world, everybody you talk to has an unlimited amount of desires. But everybody also has this very powerful, very ancient ego instinct that says, my desires are more important than everybody else's desires in the world. This is an evolutionarily necessary trait. Everybody believes that their desires are more important than everybody else's in the world. And the way to leverage this, the way to exploit this to get everybody to voluntarily do whatever you want them to do is to get them to commit to their desires and explain to you why their desires are so important to them. Why their desires are so important relative to the desires of everybody else. And if you ask the right questions, in the right order and get them to expand their desires and get them to commit their ego to their desires by asking the right questions in the right order, that will put them in a very, very powerful mind frame that gets them to get ready to make a decision. But the most critical part of this is not to inject your own ego. This is why most people will never be able to use this technique. This is why most people will never be able to seduce gorgeous women. This is why most people will never be able to make a ton of money in sales simply by asking questions. Because once you turn off your ego, once you relax your ego and ask people what they want, ask people why they want what they want, and get people to commit that what they want is so important, and get them to talk about that commitment, that is the perfect frame of mind to get them in, to get them to do whatever you want them to do. Because all you need to do is, when you put them in this mind frame of committed to their desires and ego commitment to their desires, and just put a suggestion in front of them, they will take this suggestion and they will truly believe it is their own suggestion. She said this has a lot to do with kind of ancient evolutionary programmed self-hypnosis. That when people talk about their desires, when they talk about their ego commitment to their desires, this is a very, very self-hypnotic mind frame to put them in. And once they see the world through this ego commitment to their desires, everything they see, they will be unstoppably compelled to go after, whether that's you or sex with you or buying your product or even giving you money. She said she reverse engineered this concept from people that were master scam artists, that were able to talk to people and within an hour of having a conversation, get them to transfer all kinds of money into their bank account. Now, she said sociopaths can do this because sociopaths don't have an ego. Sociopaths aren't worried about their ego integrity. Sociopaths can easily slip into any kind of personality they need to talk to the other person. But if you're not a sociopath, but you can relax your ego, if you're not a sociopath and you can relax your ego, you can easily ask the right questions in the right order and put other people into the right mind frame, and they will do whatever you want. They will come absolutely obedient to what you suggest, so long as you suggest it in a kind of roundabout way that doesn't involve your own ego. That's the trick. That's the secret. Expand their desire map. Get them to commit to their desires with their ego, and put a suggestion in front of them outside of your ego, and they will take this suggestion. They will take this advice, and they will do whatever you want them to do. She said she tried to teach this to people, but because people have access to debt, because people have access to so much money, they're not really interested in the deep psychological self-hypnotic techniques that she can teach people. They're not interested in the deep psychological self-hypnotic techniques that you can use to persuade anybody to do anything. Nobody's interested in the self-hypnotic, evolutionarily programmed techniques that you can engineer in the minds of other people, the minds of anybody you want, and exploit their mental processes to persuade them, to seduce them to do anything.